right, everybody, it's about 1:30, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So welcome or welcome back if you were with us earlier. Again, my name is Narate Sen, and I'm the Chapter Relations Manager here at DBSA. The topic of this presentation is shared leadership. We will discuss what it is, why it's useful, and how to implement it in your organization. This session will be about an hour long, and there will be time at the end for questions and comments. All participants are on mute and will remain on mute unless you raise your hand, virtually, that is. So to speak verbally, you'll need to either call in or have a microphone attached to your computer, but this session is being recorded. If you do not wish your voice to be recorded, please submit your typed questions or comments by clicking on the speech bubble on the lower left-hand corner of your screen. So shared leadership. What do you think shared leadership means? Please submit your responses in the chat, and we'll compare our answers. So someone said that it's delegating responsibilities within the organization. Someone else said that it's working as a team. Another one says delegating and involving others to take on the responsibilities. Someone else said there is more than one person leading. And another said that people take turns leading. Well, shared leadership is all of these things and more. Shared leadership is a leadership style that broadly distributes leadership responsibilities such that people within a team and organization lead each other. What you see on screen here is only an example of what a shared leadership structure within a chapter can look like. You can see that it's very flat in the sense that the arrows goes in all directions, decisions are being made at different levels, but this is only an example. There are so many different ways a shared leadership can be structured. Because there are various models of shared leadership, sometimes it's easier to process what it is by defining what it is not. So for example, this is hierarchical leadership structure. I believe most of you will be familiar with this structure. It is used by the military, private corporations, and many other organizations, including nonprofits. It is a top-down structure where decisions are made at the higher levels and implementation happens at the lower levels. Did anyone have any particular questions about hierarchical leadership? I wanted to ask you guys, like, how is your chapter or state organization structured? Go ahead and answer, and then I will tally the results. So here are the results. It looks like no one is doing a hierarchical leadership. There are a number doing shared leadership, a number doing combination, and some has another structure that they're using and some are not sure. Well, I think defining what kind of leadership structure you have currently is an important thing to understand in case you decide that's not working for you, what changes to implement, and that sort of thing. So I first want to talk about what all chapters must have in terms of leadership. All chapters must have at least 3 board members, usually fulfilling the roles of president, treasurer, and secretary. And second, all chapters must have regular elections with limits on how many consecutive terms an individual can fulfill in a particular role. The specifics of this varies from chapter to chapter and should be detailed in the chapter's bylaws. And while these requirements encourage shared leadership, a chapter can be following them and continue to have a more hierarchical structure. And how a chapter is structured is up to the chapter's board. But in my experience, shared leadership is a natural fit for peer support. Does anyone have any thoughts as to why these two are a natural fit? Like, what principles do you think they share? So one response is that it shares equality. Another is collaboration. Combined experience is another response. Someone else says that you're learning from one another. Yes. And another says, in a support group, there's a facilitator, but he's not necessarily the leader in the sense that he tells other people what to do. And these are all excellent responses. In addition to having so much in common with peer support, shared leadership has a number of benefits. One is adaptability. What types of situations has your chapter faced where adaptability was important? One person responded that when there is turnover of leadership due to people moving. Another says when people aren't following through. Yeah. And honestly, any changes that happens, change happens all the time. Nothing ever really stays the same, but like just moving locations, and, incorporating new people, dealing with any situation where a change is coming, that's when adaptability is important. The other thing is dealing with complex issues. It's often easier when you have shared leadership to manage complex issues because it's the idea that 2 heads are better than 1. The types of complex issues that a chapter might face is fundraising can be, a thing that a lot of our chapters do, and the more complex fundraising gets, the more people that you need to have involved. I hear from chapters all the time that reaffiliation is a big thing that takes up a lot of time. A lot of decisions need to be made, information needs to be gathered. So having a lot of people to be able to help you with that is great. And then also conflict resolution. I think someone mentioned that whenever there's conflict within the group, sometimes these issues are complex. There's not a right or wrong answer or clear black and white, this is what you should do. Sometimes a lot of it requires really thinking through all the aspects of it, looking at it from different perspectives, which having more than one person doing that is really helpful. And how do you think shared leadership would help improve decision making? Someone said that that's when people can easily come up with multiple options when there's more than one person. The group is run more efficiently. There's room for growth. Decision making, when it's done through a group and team effort, you have to have buy-in from everyone. And so in that way, everyone feels empowered to state their opinion. They feel like they've been heard, even if the final decision isn't exactly what they would have chosen. The fact that they had the opportunity to speak and to at least know that someone listened to them versus someone else just deciding for them what's going to happen. I think that's where improved decision making comes in, because getting everyone to understand the process and will help people support and stand by that decision, even if that's not the choice that they personally would make. Someone else said, more flexibility for responsible parties, and that's great. Flexibility is great. So there are drawbacks to shared leadership, and one of them is the loss of short-term efficiency. And what I mean by that is that it's going to take a longer time to get things done when more than one person is involved in making decisions, and you will just naturally need more time. In addition to needing more time, you will also need more people. We'll go over how to recruit others into a shared leadership structure, but the point that I wanted to make is that these investments of time and people is that once you make it, you'll be able to reap the benefits of it, including long-term efficiency. If you had to make a choice between short-term efficiency and long-term efficiency, I would hope that the long-term view is what you would take versus a short-term view, because as a chapters are not short-term. Chapters are not just shouldn't be trying to just get through the next couple of months. They should be thinking about, how do they get through the next couple of years. There are risks to a hierarchical leadership structure only. And some of the risk, I think a lot of you mentioned, is that, stagnation, lack of new ideas or growth. I think anybody who spent any time in the workforce will love the idea of doing something because it's the way we've always done it. And that happens in chapters too, especially in organizations where the same leadership has been in place for years. Rotating through and having new people and new ideas is one way to make sure that you are growing as a chapter. The other thing is leadership burnout. A lot of you said this earlier about why shared leadership is important. And leadership burnout is incredibly common in hierarchical structures where much of the pressure is placed on one individual. And small chapters where both the decision-making and implementation falls on the same person is particularly susceptible to it. We will have a separate webinar on burnout prevention later this month. It will be presented by our very own Angie Day. So I would encourage you to check out this month's leadership link for the details. It went out this past Wednesday, so you can check it out on chapter management or check your email inboxes. The other risk is dissolution. I think in my time with chapter relations, the vast majority of chapters that end up dissolving do so because of leadership burnout. Leaders tell me, I don't have anyone to step in, I have to move, or I have family I need to take care of, I need to take care of myself. And we understand that a person's wellness comes first, and if there's no one to step in their place, that just means there's no one to step in their place. And that is a very difficult decision that the leaders that I've worked with have had to make. And prevention is, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so that's what I really want everyone who's attending this presentation to think about and understand about how to plan for the long term of their chapter and not put the chapter at this kind of risk. So if you do decide to take steps towards shared leadership or to improve the shared leadership structure you already have, I think the first thing you need to do is make a commitment to change and then convince others to do the same, which is a lot easier said than done. And I strongly encourage you to share this presentation with others in your organization. And you are welcome to reach out to us at Chapter Relations to help facilitate this discussion among your board. And this is not an easy conversation to have, but taking the first step is just with talking with other people within your organization. Once you're committed, you will also need to invest the time to educate and plan. The amount of time needed will vary from chapter to chapter, but I strongly recommend blocking out a full calendar year with steps that are taken throughout the year, with deadlines of what you want to happen. And once you have the commitment of your leadership and you want to take this next step to do that kind of planning, you know, Angie, Emily, and I here in the office, we're here to help you do that kind of strategic planning. And next is fundamental management practice, having those in place. DBSA has a list of policies and procedures that we think all chapters should have. I have spent a large part of this year putting together policies and templates on, you know, financial policies, board policies, all of that. And they're all on chapter management. And more will be coming before the end of this year, and I'm sure, and we will be creating more next year. So I strongly encourage you, as part of your year-long plan, to make sure that you have these policies and practices in place, because it's much easier to recruit people to volunteer positions, board positions, when they know exactly what those responsibilities entail. If it's a lot of just knowledge transfer through just talking, like, things are going to get lost. And I've talked to people who've come on as a new leader, and they're like, oh, so-and-so was in charge of that, and I don't even know where to begin. And we're happy to help you and do all of that, but imagine how much easier it would be to just to be able to hand a new person a little binder with all your practices and policies in there, and it's always something that they have to refer to, that they can change in their time as a leader and to be able to pass on to the next person. And then the last thing is engagement and accountability. It is this last point that I want to spend some time on, because I think this is something that I have heard from chapters saying that they do have a difficult time. A lot of you have said that you're having a hard time getting people to share leadership with. And I think to resolve that, you do have to start building engagement within your community. And ways that you can build engagement, I have some examples listed here, is defining your chapter's value to the community. And I would strongly suggest this is a group activity that you do, determining, like, what do you do well, what value do you provide, and what would be missed if your chapter no longer exists. You know, people will be more engaged with your chapter if they strongly believe in the value that the chapter offers to themselves personally, and then just in general to the community at large. The other is lead by example, and this is something that we've talked earlier in our diversity session, in our intro session with Angie, about doing what you want others to do. So volunteering if you want others to volunteer, being transparent if you want other people to be transparent, follow your own policies if you want other people to follow the policies that you've set. And then the other is being transparent. I also, in my role, also talk to chapter and support group participants whenever they have conflict with the board leadership. And I think a lot of times this comes from a lack of transparency. And that's something that we work with the participant and the chapter to set up. Okay, there's this miscommunication here. The boundaries are blurred. Like, let's help define that. Let's make that transparent. Let's write up these policies. And that's a lot of the work that we do in order to resolve conflict, because that kind of conflict erodes engagement. A lot of times people would rather, like, you know, step away from a organization rather than work through, you know, because working through it is hard and difficult. And we want to make sure that you're making it as easy as possible to resolve these types of conflicts, so that you're not losing people because it's just easier for them to leave rather than to deal with the issues. Second is expressing appreciation. I think, you know, whenever you see somebody doing something great, something that you want to encourage, giving them some positive reinforcement. You know, things that a chapter can do is just saying thank you, you know, sending out cards either for a particular time of the year, like New Year's, or just thank you cards whenever, having like a little luncheon or pizza party if possible. People really appreciate these little things. And that follows with providing opportunities for socialization. And that can be just as simple as having time before or after meetings to chit-chat, having a Facebook page where people can communicate with each other outside of the group. Some chapters have organized outings, such as picnics and movies. But keep in mind that any event organized by the chapter must follow the same guidelines as a support group. And you should avoid the use of private homes for these types of organized events, just because that sort of blurs the boundaries between what is a chapter, event and versus a personal private event. I do have a couple of questions here that I've got that I do want to answer. One was, do you recommend bylaws be in that binder? Yes, we recommend bylaws are publicly available within the chapter records and should be passed on from leader to leader as you go through. And bylaws change all the time. That's fine, but they should be documented, those changes, and so that people know, oh, in 2010 we changed the term limit from 2 to 3 or 3 to 2. So that is the kind of institutional knowledge that you want. Anything that you think the next leader will want and need, that should be in the binder. I have another question about, are there generic templates available for officer positions? That includes duties and responsibilities. I am working on that. Each chapter will want to define that so that it suits their chapter, but we will have a list of those available, I think, by the end of this year. So keep your eye out on Leadership Link. Anytime we create new resources, that's where we're going to announce it. I have another question about, do you recommend mediator to assist with conflict resolutions within boards? That's up to the chapter to decide, and depending on the issue. So unfortunately, I can't give you a yes or no answer. A mediator can be a great option if it is a very difficult situation. Boards, most of our chapters are working with a rather small, and we would hope that bringing an outside person isn't necessarily like the first step. And then also, if there are issues within the board, you can always contact one of us in the office to talk through whether a mediator is a step that you want to take. I think it's also important to identify where engagement is weak so that you can focus your energies where it is needed most. This diagram is an example of how a chapter could grow its leaders. Officers come from board members who come from facilitators, who come from volunteers, who come from regular participants, who at some point was a new participant. If any of these pools are less than robust, then recruiting new leaders will be very difficult. So as you think about your own chapter, think about which of these pools are you strong and which of these pools are you weak. And maybe focus on one pool at a time rather than trying to do everything all at once. Or perhaps assigning different people to work on different pools or to brainstorm different committees or groups. I'm not going to go into the specifics of growing a particular pool because we could have a whole session on each one. And in fact, Angie will be hosting one for volunteering immediately after this one. So I strongly encourage you to attend that session. But if you were interested in learning more, we have a ton of resources on chapter management, on getting new support group participants, on building a volunteer program, on training facilitators, and all of that. And then I also wanted to talk about empowering individuals. Okay, once you have a leadership team in place, you want to make sure that they feel empowered. And to do that, you'd have to cultivate a climate in which people feel free to take initiative on assignments. And what does that mean? That means like you can't do everything, and you have to let people know that you can't do everything and that you need them to take the initiative, that you need them to volunteer and see where it goes. And I think once you do have people and encourage them to do even little things. I think Angie was talking about, just having someone being a greeter. Like it's like one little step at a time, getting people to volunteer a little more, a little more, a little more, because it's really hard to ask someone to step from being, I'm a new person, and then ask them to be an officer. That's a big jump for people. So you want to sort of ease them into it. The other thing that you can do to empower individuals is rotate responsibilities and let people know that that's what's happening. You say, like, this is something that you'll do now, but like next week or next month or next year, you can do something else so that people can learn what they like, what they're good at, and also to learn what they're not good at, because not everybody's going to be great at everything, but giving them the chance to do it and get a feel for it, really, and letting them know that they can fail. It's not going to be the end of the world. and that, you and the other members of the team are going to be there for them to help them learn and fulfill the responsibilities to the best of their abilities. Also, giving people discretion and autonomy over their tasks, which means letting them make certain decisions just on their own. If you assign someone to schedule a movie outing, don't tell them when to have it, which movie to go to, all this stuff. Give them some parameters and see what they can do. And when they do come back to you, I'm going to skip down to the last one, is don't second guess the decisions they've made. And this goes back to letting them make decisions, letting them have autonomy, and letting them fail, and learning from their mistakes. I would definitely say intercede if you think that it's appropriate. So this last one that I have, set appropriate follow-up meetings to review progress and take corrective action. Sometimes you will need to correct people if you see them going down the wrong path. If they chose a rated R movie for your outing, you can say, hey, a rated R movie has these things. Do you think that would be appropriate? And asking them questions and letting them come to the conclusions that you think is appropriate. Instead of just saying, hey, no, you can't take people to a rated R movie. So I think, each situation will be different. And then I want to go back to this one, considering yourself a resource rather than the manager. You're a person who has knowledge that you want to share with other people, and just setting yourself up in that mindset rather than being like, I'm in charge, I've got to tell people what to do, I've got to make sure that the ship keeps running and all of that. But a lot of it has to do with your mindset about how you see yourself and how you see yourself in the role of leader. And then I did accidentally skip over this one about providing the resources needed and encouraging its use. That's what I mean by going back to having the policies and practices written down in place and providing that to people and giving them that so that they can, be independent and refer to it rather than constantly asking whoever they think is in charge, what to do and what the rules are. Everybody has access to that. I have a question is there a recommended best practice for determining the length of time that a person who has been coming to a DBSC meeting for X amount of time before that person can qualify to become a group facilitator? The national office doesn't determine any length of time. Leave it up to the chapters, because every chapter is different, and that really should be a decision made by the board about what they think the qualifications are for a facilitator. And that's something that you'll discuss together, think about the pros and cons, and that's a lot of times how decisions are made in a shared leadership structure. In other words, how much consistent group participation experience is recommended? Are there different examples from other DBSA chapters? That is a great question for the discussion group on Facebook, just because that'll be an easier way for you to have a conversation with the other chapter leaders, because I do know it varies from chapter to chapter. The last thing I want to talk about is succession planning. Regardless of what kind of leadership structure your organization has, you have to have a succession plan. Having one in place is a promise to your community that peer support will always be there for them. And succession planning includes having a list of all the positions that are necessary for the functioning of the chapter, a timeline of when people who are currently in those positions will likely step down, and then having a list of candidates who will likely take their place. It should also list what training or development these potential candidates need to have in order to be successful in that role. Now, it's important for the board to be making these decisions, but it's also, and sometimes this has to be done in private, not publicly. You do not want to be discussing a candidate's viability as a future office holder publicly. That's private decision made by the board. But what you do want to be public about is that you are doing that kind of work, that you are thinking about who's going to be the next president, so that people have the opportunity to self-identify themselves. It's hey, I am interested in doing this. I want to be involved in the board at a future, but I don't think I'm ready for it now. I might be ready for it in 2 years. But just letting people know that succession planning is happening and that everyone currently on the board is working hard to make sure that the chapter continues on without them. I have a question. Do you recommend having some closed meetings? Now, I'm not sure, do you mean closed board meetings or closed support group meetings? If you mean closed board meetings, that's up to the board. If you are discussing sensitive issues like succession planning or conflict resolution or anything like that, then yes, recommended to have a closed meeting, but you should also have public meetings so people can, see how a board meeting is run and whether or not they're interested in participating, so that it's about transparency, about showing people what it's like to be a board member, what responsibilities you have. I think just giving people information, more information rather than less, is great. Choosing to have a closed board meetings, you should have a reason for why it's closed, because people may ask, why is this board meeting closed? And you want to be able to say, we're sensitive, confidential about a particular thing that we're not ready to share. So then, do we have any questions? What is the best way to go about the sharing of ideas and concerns? Well, we do recommend that every chapter has a policy about how individuals will, submit a concern to the board. And that could be just as simple as like, hey, this is the email address for the board. If there's concern, send it here, and we'll respond. It could be, if they want it to be anonymous, you can have like a box at a support group meeting that people can slip their concerns into. And then, in addition to accepting that kind of feedback, you also want to have a process for responding. It won't do to have people submit concerns to you and then not have a process of how to deal with it or how to bring it back to the group. If you had an example of a concern that someone has, approached you with, and how to sort of think through that, again, you're welcome to share it here, and we could talk through it, or you can contact us later, and we'll talk to you about that. All right, so I think we will go ahead and close, and thank you so much for joining us.